Hello, everyone. Welcome. Hello again for the second time. Today we'll do a little bit of a review of some of the things that we've been covering up to this point, trying to continuously circle back and make sure we bring in the stuff that we've been practicing just so we don't lose sight of it, and of course because it all sort of applies to any position we find ourselves in. And then I want to look a little more closely at some of the attacks from the back. We're actually going to introduce the Kimura Grip today. We'll do it from the back position, and we'll also introduce the triangle from the back position. Now, that's a pretty uncommon way to approach beginner lessons on the whole and the back position in general, but I like this notion because it allows us to sort of build from sort of a white belt to a blue belt to a purple belt to a brown belt level, where at first we were just doing awareness. I have a submission, my partner has defensive hands, maybe that's all we expect from ourselves. Then we went into sort of a blue belt level understanding, which is really getting into the mechanics, making sure that we're able to complete the strangleholds, making sure that my partner can't break my grip by just grabbing my hand in any sort of random place. And then we went up another level. We looked at sort of this purple belt idea where I'm having to balance the movements that I make and the mechanics that I use with an awareness of her movements and what she has going on, and to make sure that I don't just go into a submission and lose track of her escape and then all of a sudden she's gone and I've got nothing to show for it. Right? So the next progression from that would be into the brown belt level. And the brown belt level can be a little bit tricky to describe just in words. I tend to use the term waves to describe it, meaning that I have a whole bunch of attacks and I'm just sort of pushing all of them towards you at the same time, and you're trying to defend them as best you can. One of these attacks starts to break through, and that's the one I end up picking and going with. That would be in contrast to something like at the blue belt or the purple belt level, where maybe we're only able to go one attack at a time, and as my partner defends that one attack, I've got to decide in that moment what my next attack is. Okay, so singular attacks and sort of trading between them, that's totally fine for the blue and purple belt level. But as you go towards brown belt, you start having simultaneous attacks that all come in at once, and the person's just sort of trying to juggle all these different things, and something breaks through. Okay, so that's going to be our focus today, is introducing some of the more high percentage attacks from the back, and then we'll start to see how it allows us to look at new topics starting from a familiar place. Okay, so welcome again to everyone that's just now joining us. It's good to see all of you. Some of you haven't seen your face in a while, and it's really, I mean, I'm not smiling because I'm trying to. I'm just smiling because I'm seeing you. That's the truth of it. Okay. So let's dive in. Let's look at the back position. I'm going to just really quickly run through the stuff we've covered so far, and then we'll spend a little more time on some of this newer material. Okay, so if I'm on my partner's back and we already have our hooks in place, we've seen that when we use our hooks, we want those knees going forward. We want to pull the heels in. We want to place a seatbelt grip whenever possible, and that seatbelt grip is going to be an elbow that goes in front of the shoulder. It's going to be my hands joining together where my strangle hand is always covered up, and then I use that to attach my sternum to her spine, never being satisfied sort of at a distance like this. We bring everything in close. The last piece before I ever attack is I want to place my head trap where I'm either ear to ear or the back of my head to my partner's ear. Okay, and this is a solid start for the back position. Now, whenever you get into these situations, you're going to want to go to a submission, and you're going to need to have some things that allow you to take down their defenses and build up your offenses. Okay, so let's just scoot ahead this way. So let's assume we've gotten all these pieces in place. Let's assume we go off to the side here. One of the reasons we might do that is it lets us place this bottom hook all the way across our partner's belt. Now I can lock a body triangle just fine here, but if I'm having trouble doing that, I might just step on my own foot. Okay, that frees up my right leg to do other things that are useful to me, mostly deal with her defensive hands. Okay, and you'll see that right now as my seatbelt grip came in, Emmy did her defensive grip, which is her left hand seeking out my right, and then her right hand covering up her left. Okay, so our hands stack up in this way. So we've looked at some of the ways that we can eliminate these defenses. A direct way would be just allowing for her to keep hold of my hand and guiding it so that it goes below her own chest. If she stays in this position like she is now, she's essentially let me put her hand into a position where I can take my leg over the top and start to scrape away one of her defensive arms. Okay, let's assume that happens and she keeps this grip here. What I want to do is get to her thumb line, so I turn so that her thumb line is exposed to my left hand here. I go in with a backhand frame, I peel her grip off, and I extract my hand. Now I can pin this grip to her chest. So there's one defensive arm gone, there's the other defensive arm taken care of. Now I just have to get underneath her chin. She's likely going to make it hard for me to just wrap around her neck and go into a strangle. So what I want to do is use my head trap like a cutting board and my strangle hand like a knife and just start slicing from behind the ear until I can get some place underneath her chin. Usually the way this works is we go from behind the ear and we look to get to the chin and then flip the chin up. Then I can either punch my whole forearm through and cover up my thumb, or I can flip up the chin and just put my thumb into her lapel. Okay, so at this point we're starting to get into our junk grip where my thumb is hidden, but it's not really a great grip for me to strangle with. What I want to do is improve this grip by taking my left hand and pulling out all of that slack from her lapel. Then I might take a grip on her other lapel, and now my goal is to take my right elbow back and behind, and at the same time to move my head away from her head, like this. And as I do that, my left leg is going to push in the opposite direction that my right hand is pulling. So the action of the right hand is like this, and the action of the left leg with nothing else in place is a pushing action away. Okay, so with all that said and done, we've got our grips, we've got it all set in stone. We start moving our head away and pushing, and we get a nice finish from the back. Okay. Now again, we did other strangles, the rear naked from the back. We talked a little bit more about the specifics of the grip. We talked about her defenses and some of her avenues of escape. All of that is you know how to use the internet. It's all over there somewhere. But just as a quick run through, just so we're all on the same page, that's essentially what we're trying to accomplish up to this point. I was on her back. I needed to get through her defenses, and one way I can finish once I do all of that is to strangle with the lapels. Now, there's going to be times when you're trying to attack somebody's neck, and you're only really using one of your hands against hopefully none of their hands, but sometimes one or two of their hands. And what ends up happening is you get sort of caught in this loop where your partner knows you want to trap their arm, you know you want to trap their arm, maybe you're only really comfortable using your right hand in the lapel and not your left hand. And so what ends up happening is, as long as they stave off the beginnings of your submission, that one submission is probably not going to break through. Now, that doesn't mean you should stop attempting it. It means you should keep attempting that submission, but also be on the alert for what is allowing for them to sustain this sort of loop, this defensive loop where no one makes any progress. Maybe they don't escape, but I don't make a breakthrough. Anytime that's happening, you have some other attack that you should start putting onto the table. One that I like to show early on is the Kimura Grip from the back that leads to the arm lock. There's a whole bunch of reasons for this. One, you got to learn the Kimura at some point. And two, it shows you that when somebody really puts up walls of defense around their neck, a lot of times what happens is their arms become exposed in different ways. It can be tough to be aware of that because you're trying to really punch through at the neck and you feel resistance around their neck. And so we tend to add more to where we find resistance. But what we should usually do is go, okay, they've put all their defensive forces up at the front gate. We got to sustain an attack at the front gate, but someone's got to go around to the back door. Okay, somebody's got to make a different move here. Okay, and that's sort of what the Kimura lets us do. So let's take this from the same back position here. Now, let's just turn to about 45 here. If we remember that we have our seatbelt grip and that we know that my partner's defensive arm primarily is this left arm here. So when my right arm goes to attack, she wants to grab onto it. So I know that this arm is going to be in play close to my right. Okay, if it wasn't, I would just go straight to her neck. So when we go to attack with the Kimura grip, we're basing it on an assumption that this arm is trying to engage my right arm. And I can sort of predict where her arm's going to be by placing my right arm in different places. If I went out here and she just followed my arm, I would strip her grip and now I'm on my way. So what ends up happening is she grabs a hold of my arm here. If I were to go all the way out where I was before, she'll let go and go back to her own neck and start blocking in anticipation of me trying to go behind her ear. So even when she's not holding on to it, I know where her hand's going to be because it has to protect her neck. Okay, so all of that is to say you can safely start building up attacks on this arm here, this defensive arm, with your own left arm. Let's look at how that might go. I've got my grip and puts in her defensive grips. We go off to the side here, and so far we're still in frame, so everything is actually excellent. Now I know she wants to keep a hold of my arm here, and I start trying to fiddle around and get rid of her defensive arms, and I even let her start tracking my hands down, but she does a good job of not letting me bring it below her chest. Now I snake my left hand through and I use that backhand frame where I go thumb side chop into her elbow. Okay, so I'm flexing my wrist down and into the floor here so that her elbow is essentially pinned. Now I take away this thread of the right hand. I just pull everything behind her ear. At this point, I'm going to move that elbow to the same side of her head as my frame arm here. I get a hold of her wrist, I get a hold of my own wrist, and I use my left elbow to lift up her elbow. And now I've started to engage her with a Kimura grip. Okay, there's a whole bunch of good things I can do from here. The first thing I would recommend is take that leg that was previously trying to trap the arm and just take a bite onto their shoulder with your knee. Okay, now that's going to make it possible for me to start building up the rest of the arm lock. I can start placing my leg over the top, curling my leg down to the floor, and then coming up into a finishing arm lock. We're going to look a little more closely at that Kimura grip, but and some of the details that are involved there. But what I want you to really see is she really had to commit that left hand to defending. I knew it, she knew it. And so I start building a follow-up attack where I address that defensive arm, and now she's got a new problem. Do I let that Kimura resolve on my arm, or do I try and move that arm away, grab a hold of it with my second hand, and potentially expose my neck to the initial attack? Okay, and this is a really powerful combination for doing that. So again, here we are. Now let's turn over this one. And we've got our grip, she gets her grip, we go off to the side here, and things are looking good. We place that bottom hook where we want it to go. We start looking for a winning hand fight position, straight grips, cross grips, whatever it can be. But she's holding on to my strangle hand here. So my support hand goes thumb side chop. I go back and away from her, and I go overhead slap, and I want to catch her wrist. Okay, now I grab a hold of my own wrist. So it's thumb side chop, overhead slap, and then grab. Now I do a forward throttle, and I straighten out my arms while I turn my biceps out. I'll show that a detail in a moment. This lifts her elbow off the ground. Okay, and as long as I've got her elbow off the ground, she's not going to be able to get out of this Kimura, or at least relieve the danger of the Kimura. I take my right knee and I place it here over her shoulder. I'm going to use that to help sit myself up, and then my right leg can come over the top as a cross-faced leg. My feet go to the floor, and we go in to finish the arm lock. Okay? And we can talk about finishing the arm lock another time, but that would be a standard way of approaching it. Now, if you remember when we, a couple lessons ago, went over her main objective when she's trying to defend and escape from the back. The main thing she was always trying to do is, some way, shape, or form, get her inside elbow to the floor. Okay? What we're doing right now is preventing her from having an inside elbow and keeping her elbow off the floor. So we're directly preventing the escape and amplifying our own attack. Okay, so let's look at that one more time. We come in, here's the grip, off to the side, start looking for the arm, start looking for ways to break down her defense. Not happening, we go in, thumb side chop. I move away, overhead slap and grab, and I grab my own wrist. I straighten out my arms, turn my biceps out, and lift her elbow. Now, if I were to take off my hooks and Em were to step her legs outside of mine and try to free herself from here, and try to put her back on the floor like this, keep on. Even if she got all the way to here, like this, and I've got no hooks, and she even got up onto her knees here, you can always use that grip to return them down to the floor. Okay, all I did was pick up on her elbow. Okay, now, first thing is you'll notice, Em was a little bit like, wait, what do you, because you could sort of sense that you want me to go that way. There's like this invisible wall that you can detect, that even though she made it over to the left and got up to her knees, I was able to put her back down to the floor. Now we didn't pre-plan that the exchange right now, but your opponents will also have that same sense, where they're essentially anticipating that there's this invisible barrier they won't be able to break through. So they're not likely going to even make the attempt to escape, because they will feel that that elbow is stopping them in their tracks. And that is absolutely excellent, because now they're keeping the back position for you. They're just saying, oh, I can't get out going that way. And you're like, yeah, you can't get out going that way. And I better stick over here and defend my neck. Yeah, you better stay over here and defend it. And then you keep building your attacks, and now they're stuck in place because of the threats that you've put on the table. This is the idea that I started off with today, which is this notion of waves. You have sort of these multiple attacks that are all coming at the person at the same time. And it's not so much that one of them resolves or the other one resolves. is that all of them can potentially resolve, and so they are stuck trying to deal with all of them. And then we see one of those things actually resolve as observers. Okay, and it's really important to understand that this is something you are aiming to develop in your own skill set. It's not something that is special or unique to me, or that only happens after black belt. It happens as a natural progression as you really understand the mechanics of a technique, and you understand the mechanics of their escape. You know what sort of minimums you need to put in place to keep them trapped in one place and have no chance of escape. And once that happens, the submission becomes a lot easier because less of your attention is worried about them getting out. They're just stuck in place, and you can really pump all of your resources into that one attack or that one finish that seems to be resolvable. Okay, so one more time here. We're on the back, and we go off to the side. We would really like it if we could place that bottom hook into position and then maybe directly trap this secondary arm here, bring it below the chest, and then trap the arm behind the back like this. This would be great. If that happens, I know her left hand is going to be hunting for my right here. She might be fanning her hand like it is now, or she might be grabbing a hold of it and directly trying to prevent me from getting a grip. Okay, if I can, I'll strip that grip off and go right into the neck, into the attacks that we looked at before. Sometimes you're going to have trouble doing that. Sometimes you're going to have trouble stripping the grip off or going under the chin. And so we added the Kimura Grip as a secondary attack. So we come in and like a backhand frame, like we used before, but this time the thumb goes down to the elbow and traps their arm by the floor. Now that the elbow is trapped, I can pull my hand back and behind her ear, and then I can bring that arm all the way over the top using a sort of overhead slap motion to grab a hold of the wrist and my own wrist. Okay? The moment these grips connect, I'm looking to straighten out my arms and turn my biceps out. So if you look at my right arm here, I'm trying to turn my arm this way, like this. Okay? You don't really see all that turning happen because my two grips are both doing that, and they're sort of going in opposite directions. So visually, it just looks like this. But if I did them one at a time, here would be one, and here would be the other. Okay? All together, that takes out all the slack between my two arms and her arm. Okay? Once we've got this in place, our whole thing is to keep that elbow off the ground. If I can do that, then I can keep her in this position indefinitely. If I get a sense that her elbow is starting to slip inside of my elbow like this, that's no good. I want to reset, or I want to address that before it happens. Okay, we can look at how to do that later. So we go throttling forward, biceps turning out, arms go straight. Now we start looking to take that right leg and get a second bite over the shoulder here. Okay, that's going to make it a lot easier for me to sit up on her and finish the arm lock. Okay, we can continue lifting. We can place the cross-face leg, and when this leg comes over, try to avoid using big swings with no effect. Okay, instead I want to circle. My knee may start open like it is now, but as it comes around, my knee will turn in, and I want to grab a hold of her head with my knee. Now I open my knee to pin her down to the floor and sit up. Okay. And again, I know I've said this a few times before, but it's important to keep this in mind. This is a secondary attack that is a complement to your standard collar strangles or rear naked strangle from the back. You should commit 70, 80, 90% of your efforts to finishing on the neck. And then the remaining 10 or so percent can be used to develop kimuras, or at least the thread of kimuras that let you go back into that initial attack. Okay? So that's the first peek at a kimura from the back. Just like any other topic, there's basically an endless amount we can study on that one item, but we'll leave it at that for the moment. Let's look at a related topic where you're often going to find that, especially at the beginning, you'll be comfortable with the seatbelt grip, probably with your dominant arm as the strangle hand and your support arm as your remaining arm. And most of you have two arms at most, so that's covering all your arms. And you get used to this grip, you get used to the head trap, you get used to the combinations of movements on one side, and then opportunities where you might be required to do it with your left hand. You're kind of like, maybe not today. Maybe I'll do a different attack that sort of fills in this gap where I'm not as comfortable with my left. Okay, and that's totally fine at first. But at some point we're going to want to have ways to make use of a left-handed seatbelt, even if we're most comfortable with a right-handed seatbelt. One way to do this is to just mirror your attacks. I do right hand, I use lapels, great. I do left hand, I use lapels, also great. But that actually is very challenging for some positions, and in other positions it's not so tough. In the back position, it can be pretty challenging to get comfortable with the right-handed seatbelt and all the attacks associated with it, and then mirror those on the left side. That's not actually necessary. As long as you have the seatbelt grip and you learn the Kimura grip, you can start to attack from the bad side of the back using things like a triangle. Okay, so let's look at that now. So if I'm on my partner's back and for whatever reason I'm using a left-handed seatbelt where my left arm goes over the top, and I get a hold of it and I put my head trap in place, and we do all the things we're supposed to do here, and now we're going off to the right side looking for the finish. Let's actually scoot a little bit this way. Now as we do that, we're maybe having a little bit of trouble resolving the grip itself, so we decide, you know what, I'm not going to just try and punch my right hand through to the neck. Instead, I'm going to start building up a Kimura grip. We go up and over the top, we look to get a hold of the wrist, and we look to get a hold of our own wrist. We make sure we're in frame, okay, good. And now I'm going to bring my leg over the top and take that bite out of her shoulder here. Now, I could go into an arm lock here, but another really good option to work with is to turn your two palms towards you like this. So I can see my left palm, and now I can see my right. And what I'm looking to do is pull Emmy's arm so her hand goes above her shoulder and her knuckles glue to my chest. Okay? Once this sort of thing happens and I pull, it's not a Kimura anymore, it's more the shape of an Americana. And what I would want to do is turn everything over to the side and start to lock her into a triangle. We can make adjustments from here, and then we can finish. Okay? I'm going to, of course, demonstrate that again, but what I want you to start to have in mind is we're introducing these certain shapes to your arsenal. We had this shape, which is pretty recognizable as a rear naked strangle. We had the Kimura grip, and that was a biceps out, biceps turning out, arms straightening. That's another shape. It's another type of grip. And now we're looking at this shape, the triangle. There are only a few major shapes in Jiu Jitsu that you have to know. It's not that many. And I think those are probably the best thing to learn early on. Learn all the major shapes of Jiu Jitsu, and you'll start to be able to apply them in almost every single position. Those of you that have more experience are probably familiar with triangles from mount, triangles from side control, triangle from the back, triangles from every single type of guard that you can imagine, but the shape itself is the triangle. And same with Kimura. Kimura from the back, Kimura from the side control, and you sort of see where this is going. It would be almost impossible to just learn those from a fresh start in each new position. Kimura from side control, and then you learn Kimura from the back, and it's this totally different thing, when in actuality, there's maybe like 7 or 8 total shapes that you need to know. And once you learn those, then you can apply them across a wide variety of positions, and you can start to get creative with how you combine one shape and another. Your partner defends a triangle, you find a Kimura, or vice versa. Okay, so our goal right now is really to introduce the shape of the Kimura grip and the shape called the triangle, and we're just trying to bring it into a familiar position, something we've been looking at, which is the back. Okay, and we'll be able to then apply these different shapes from positions like guard or mount and so forth and so on. Okay, so let's take another look at this this triangle from the back, where we're assuming a scenario where I'm on my bad side so that I can have some reasonable excuse for applying a triangle in this position. We go in with our grip, we look to build up as we normally would, and we go to the side here, and we're not able to make that initial breakthrough that we want to get. So we go thumb side chop. We're looking to go to an overhead slap and grab. This would be our Kimura shape. And in this position, I would want to make sure to go arms straight, biceps out, and lift my partner's elbow. But we can go a little bit further than that. We take a bite out of their shoulder, and we go 2 palms facing us. Okay, so that I curl her arm and her knuckles to my chest. I want her hand above her shoulder. Now from this position, I'm going to tilt everything over to the side, go from one hip to the other, and then lock an initial triangle here. I put my shoelaces behind her back, I bring my top knee down to my bottom knee, and we can get the finish, no problem. Okay, let's actually go from this segment. So So if we're in this position here, and let's go way up close actually. Right here, we've got our left-handed seatbelt. We make it off to the side, and Emmy brings her hands in. Yep. We start working our grips. We're looking to trap the arm, and I go thumb side chop. I bring my arm out of the way. There's the Kimura. We lift that elbow up. There's that knee over the top that traps her shoulder. And now I go 2 palms facing myself, 1 and 2. I glue her knuckles to my chest, and then I tilt, 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 until we land in the beginnings of a triangle. I can make my adjustments, scoot my way around. Don't worry, I'm still over here. We've got our top knee, it goes down towards the bottom knee, and that will give us the finish we're looking for. What will be useful later on is when I go into that same triangle, and let's say it just is not panning out for me and I end up starting to get a sense that I'm losing control of the back, and the person is coming up on top, we'll be able to just convert that into a triangle from guard, and that will be our sort of segue to studying guard positions in general. Okay, so we've got this idea where we're wanting to strangle from the back, and we're a little more comfortable with that rear naked strangle shape, or the way we would use the collars. And then we started to add in 2 additional pieces today. One of them is that Kimura Grip, and there are a lot of interesting things that come out of that. And the other is the triangle. The triangle specifically today, we were using on the off side, probably the non-dominant side of the seatbelt grip. It's a very common place to have that come up. So we'll pause there for a moment. Wanted to say hi to everyone a little more clearly and see if there's any questions or any thoughts, or if anyone wanted to have anything looked at again.
I see a question. Hey Professor, can you hear me?
Yes.
It's Cheese. So
oh, hey.
Today, kind of in line with like your back stuff right now, I got caught in a bow and arrow by one of the black belts, and I tried to defend, by pulling the arm over, and you transition arm bar.
Yeah, you should. Yeah, you gave him that one probably.
So what's my counter or defense to the arm bar off of that chain? Because I feel like when I pull the arm over to escape, it's right there. So how do I escape without putting myself in that inherent danger?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna try and answer this from sort of 2 levels of analysis. One of them is, you can probably guess, is something along the lines of, "What are you doing?" Like at that point, the reason somebody goes there is because there's no escape. But that's not the full answer. Just to clarify, did you say it was a lapel initially, and you were trying to bring that over the top? And then it...
Yeah.
Okay.
So he had the bow and arrow, and it was the left hand had the grip on the collar. So I tried to pry the left hand over the head, but then as I pry the left hand over the head, my right arm is in between his legs, and he just throws the leg over and takes the arm off. Yeah.
And then final question on this. Bow and arrow meaning control of your leg in some way, right? Pant grip or something like this?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at the sort of again. Let's look at this from a couple levels. One is, I could say, okay, here's what you would want to do to step by step escape from this position. But in all honesty, that would not really be that useful in most cases, because once things have accrued to that point where the person is on your back, they've legitimately threatened your neck with the lapel, and you're desperately trying to fight it off, and then they transition to an arm lock. It's not that you can't escape, it's that we have to really look at priority of what we're going to address and how, because things can go from really terrible to just absolutely you're in a submission without really noticing all that much difference. The big way to avoid going from terrible position to absolutely worse is minimize the amount that has to happen from your hands, okay? A good position in Jiu-Jitsu, almost by definition, reduces the amount of effective movement someone can make with their hands by themselves. It's very tempting to try and grab their hand and pull it over the top, because you feel the exertion of the hands in that area. They're on my collar. If I could pull that over my head, that strangle pressure would be relieved. But the back position itself, the use of the lapel, all of those things together are going to make it almost impossible for your hands alone to do any sort of effective work. What you really want to focus on first is getting your legs free from that sort of classic bow and arrow grip so that you can run yourself into a different alignment, maybe where you're more parallel to them, and then bringing the arm over the top is much more realistic. Okay, I'm going to try to demonstrate that a little bit here just to give you a rough idea. But again, your hands are not likely going to overcome their hands when they have a dominant position on you and they have a submission. If you could overcome it with just your hands, that's their mistake and they need to fix something. Okay, because something is off if you can beat them with just hands. But let's say if Emmy's on my back here and she's got her hooks in, she's got one going under, and she's got a lapel here. Let's actually go a little bit this way. And we start going off to the side. She's got left arm under and grab the pants. Bottom hook across, and she's even got, like I think you were saying, Mike, your arm was trapped, correct?
Yeah.
Like this. Oh my goodness. This is, let's just say, don't start here. Okay, this is not a great place. What tends to happen, if I were able to take my left hand here and do something that dragged her arm over the top, that's Emmy's mistake. Okay, everything is built up in her favor. That should not happen now. But let's just, if you notice, she's got this grip down here by my pants. Okay, and a lot of this grip is to keep me aligned with her in a certain way. She pulls here, and she moves her head away, and this way, like this, and you'll see, you can hear, now I'm strangling, we're starting to go perpendicular. Okay, that's enough. And so what the problem is I can't keep myself lined up with her like we are now. If I were able to stay like this and Emmy tried to finish, what she needs is she needs to move her head away and get her center line perpendicular to mine. So her head moves away from me, she pushes with the legs, now I'm strangling, pull here. And this makes it hard for me to realign this grip on my leg. Okay, so what you often want to do is, as somebody pulls, you stave off the effects of the strangle. You walk towards. Let's actually scoot a little bit. Sorry, we're going to rearrange just a little bit so you can see this grip, since it is sort of the focus of what we're talking about. Okay, so there we go. Now I stave off the initial effects of the strangle, and I'm looking to bring my right leg over to step and free myself from that grip. Now I've actually got a moment to realign with her, and now I've actually got a moment where I could possibly slip my head out from here or start walking along the floor. Okay, but the grip itself, pulling it over the head, usually when you see that, it's some combination of my partner sort of being a little bit off in their grip. Maybe they're pulling a little early and they haven't cinched everything in place, and so they've left some slack on the table. And then at the same time, as defender, I'm able to capitalize on that by drawing the arm over the top. But in that scenario where one arm is trapped and they're specifically holding onto your leg, think about why they're holding onto that leg. It's to try and create that sort of cross alignment with you and then actually finish. So you want to break free of that grip that's on your pant leg so that you can realign with them, and that's going to make it more realistic for you to draw the arm over the top, put your back on the floor, and things of that nature. Got it. One other point on that is, just so to tie this back into what we were just going over, is, let's say everything's set as it was before and I've got this arm trapped. Okay, let's say that Em does make it to a point, she does break my grip here and she starts walking down to the floor. I can just keep walking. Even if I don't have that grip, it's pretty easy for me to convert this into a crucifix here, and now I've got the same finish as I did a moment ago. Okay, but this is just a more extreme cross body alignment now, where my center line is perpendicular to hers. Okay, so whatever is going on, she breaks my grip, she frees herself from my hooks, whatever it is. If she keeps moving into a sort of cross position with me, I'm going to keep gaining more and more control over her, and then other submissions become available or other follow-up attacks. So the priority is go from that cross position to parallel with them, and then you can really think about escaping. Okay, if you're the defender, don't go cross, go straight on with them, line up, and then you can make your way out. Okay, Mike, does that help? Or codename Cheese, does that help out at all? Or any other questions?
Yeah, okay. No, that's really beneficial. I never thought to address the pant grip like in that sequence prior to like it's always just been adjust the arm, turn back in, and like move back into like their close guard or something, and then go from there.
Yeah, and that is an uphill battle to fight, especially if the person is, got more experience in you, then they're sort of anticipating all of that. A lot of times people don't pay much attention to that bow and arrow grip. They just grab something and leave it alone, and that's it. But always try to let your attention go to, why do we tend to go to this grip on the leg? It's got to have some function, otherwise I would do something else with it. And a lot of times it's to just keep the person from running their body back into this parallel alignment where the actual escapes can occur. Were there other questions on this? Let's see. Yeah. Good to see you, by the way. Good.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I had a question. Like in most back controls, you have sort of the seatbelt grip, like an over the choking hand, and your under grip, where either you have like a hand control the lapel, but it seems to be like keeping them from turning, so you could work this choke. And I think in most cases, maybe a lot of it's looking for like rear naked chokes, where I would try to switch my choking hand, and not have control on this side. Is there a good way to control their body?
Yeah,
to be able
definitely.
to win these?
So just to put Daryl, so everyone's clear on what the question was, this notion that, let's actually turn it a little bit this way. We've got the arm we're probably going to try to strangle with. We've got one hand that helps it out, does some trapping, things like this. But is there a time and place to sort of go to 2 strangle arms, or to remove this arm in some way, to sort of double up on the thread at the neck? And if yes, then what's actually going to control them? The simplest and most straightforward answer is, if you get to a position here and you lock a body triangle, you can let go and go like this, and you can attack them with either arm. You can prop yourself up for a moment, take a break, and then go back to attacking the neck. And a lot of times what ends up happening is the person we might be here in this sort of arrangement. I might have had a body triangle, and maybe I start losing the battle for the head trap. Emmy starts grinding her head through, those braids are sort of really getting in my face, and she starts trying to make her way down to the floor here. This is an excellent time to convert to the other side, either with lapel or just a naked strangle from here. But it's this body triangle downstairs that keeps us in an alignment that is favorable for me. Okay. Now, this should stand in contrast to what I just went over a moment ago, because this body triangle keeps us in alignment. I thought you said you wanted to get crossbody if you're the attacker. How does that work? When you're setting up your attack from the back, you're not finishing, but you're trapping arms, you're getting strangle hands in place, you're setting those pieces up, you want to be in this sort of alignment. And then to apply torque, you realign, you twist about 90 degrees to actually finish. So I might go left hand here to lapel, and then I go across the body to finish. Okay? So absolutely, you can go between strangling with the right or the left, removing that support hand. An easy way to start that ball rolling is to use a body triangle to free up your upper body. And then you can attack on either side. And then just keeping in mind that it's fine to be aligned with the other person if I'm attacking, as long as when I go to finish, I know when I should go across the other person's body. Okay? And just so we're on the same page with this reference, here, Em and I are lined up with each other, center line to center line. This is great for me and not so bad for her. If I'm going to attack her with lapels, you'll always see that as we move, we start trapping the arms, we start making this progress into a position where now my center line is starting to go across her center line. And the more that I can make that happen, let's say by getting a hold of the pant grip here, the more effectively I can twist her up into the submission, and the more power I'm going to gain in that particular submission. Again, parallel is usually good for setting things up, and then when it's time to finish, cross the body. Does that help out at all? Is that to your question?
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
So controlling with the legs before I give up that secondary control of the arm.
Yeah, and then also just last thing on that is just keep in mind they're gonna be alert to that happening as well. So sometimes you start right, you body triangle, you start doing something clever, going left, they start responding to that, and so the original attack is actually open, the right-handed attack again, and you're ready to finish.
Right.
I would really recommend using this when the person thinks that they're going to get out because they've got free from the head trap. Because they're you know how it is. I'm back to guard. You can relax a little bit, and then you're on their neck on the other side, and that's really a trap for them. Were there other questions on any of the things up to this point? some of you are just covered in a shroud of darkness and I can't see anything about you. I'm just assuming that you're hacking my computer right now, which is totally fine. This is not my computer, so go ahead and hack. Yeah,
Okay.
just hack away. But yeah, let me check this.
I was trying to protect my identity.
Oh, okay, good. Well,
John's on a VPN right now and everything.
yeah. Well, I'll go ahead and show everyone's social security numbers really soon, so that you can thwart those
This is a
efforts.
voice changer as well.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Right.
Just
So
listening in.
let's see. I'm always. I mean, you guys know me. The danger is not running out of things to talk about. The danger is you guys have lives and schedules, and I don't want to eat up 4 hours just talking about something I find so interesting. Just to recap, some of the things we went over today, we were really looking first at just back position and the submissions and how to do them. We started adding in our second lesson some of the defenses that the person will put in front of you. And in that second lesson, we started breaking down their defenses with the legs so that we could go back to our submissions. Third lesson, we started looking at some of the dynamics that will play between the two. What do I do as she builds her defense? What are the defenses she can build that necessitate me changing the entire position? And what are the defenses she can build that aren't really a big problem, that I can just break through and continue on my way? And then when we came in today, we started looking at, well, my offense is going well, but I'm just not able to break through with the actual submission. I'm not losing the back, I'm controlling them just fine, but that strangle is giving me some trouble. So we introduced this idea of using the Kimura grip, or the shape of the Kimura, and the triangle, or the shape of the triangle, as one, fundamental movements that you have to learn at some point, and then two, very powerful ways to either open up that strangle a second time, or to give you an alternative submission when you really just can't get the breakthrough that you need. But again, we will dig into those individual attacks, the Kimura and the triangle, in the next lesson and the lesson after that. And they'll also be sort of a gateway for us to study those on their own. But always trying to bring things back to something familiar. And up to this point, it's really been the back position, attacking from the back, and just some of the defenses to be aware of.
You got a minute, Professor?
Absolutely. Let me get a little closer here.
So, I've been chaining, like, my over underpass is my highest percentage, but on certain people, like Kaio or like, other like no black belts, over under doesn't work. So like, I'll over under and they'll threaten something like a loop choke or something because the head's right there. So I chain my over under to like leg weave to back step if that doesn't work. But it's all attacking the same side. What would you chain off of the over under just to kind of like give me some differentiation of like pass attacks that aren't kind of catering to them defending on their strong side already, if that makes sense?
So you ask the questions that I want to answer. Like there may be 1,000 questions that somebody could ask you, maybe 3 of them I'm like, oh, I could answer these questions like pretty decently. And again, we didn't set that up, but it's almost like we did. So let's just look really quickly at this, the over-under, and specifically this idea of the loop choke as a sort of counterattack. This is something I really like to do. And again, it can be really frustrating to the point where if I'm an over-under guard passer and my opponent has a very good loop choke, I may just never even put that over-under on the table because that loop choke is such a strong threat and it really doesn't require any exposure for them to get it started. And so maybe my primary attack is out the window and I'm sort of left without much to do. So if I've got M line down here, one of the main things with an over-under pass and a lot of other guard passes here is for an over-under, I need to get my shoulder down more or less by her center line. Okay, that's going to be my fixed point that lets me move around her body and actually pass her guard. Okay, in the process of getting my shoulder down into something like this, let's see, trap my leg here. When I put my shoulder down like this, I also have to get my head into a certain position across her center line. Okay, so the shoulder is what I need, and since my head has to go somewhere, I can't just throw it in the garbage and get it later. I've got to do something with it, put it across the center line. The loop choke capitalizes on that attempt to move your head across the center line like this. And it actually motivates you to not move your head across the center line, because if you do, you feel like you're going to get loop choked. So what ends up happening is people keep their head on the original side of the center line instead of going across it. And that's a big problem if you need to get your shoulder down. If I need to put my shoulder here, but at the same time, I'm supposed to keep my head on this side of the center line because of that loop choke, never gonna happen. Okay, so over under does go right out the window. Now, just I'll demonstrate sort of what Emmy will be doing in a moment, but just as a quick piece of advice, if you're going to be challenged from putting your head this way across the center line, and you're being forced essentially into a position where your head is on this side of the center line, you want to put your hip on the opposite side of the center line. So guard passes that let your hip go to one side and your head on the side it's on right now, those are going to be the main options we're looking for. Let's take one that Cheese had mentioned, which would be a leg weave. The leg weave it's going to go on your side just a bit. If I were to try a standard leg weave here and to pass to my left, that's probably not going to work out all that well. But if I allow for a leg weave to occur and my head moves to this side where it was going because of the loop choke threat, and my hip to go towards the far side, and I actually walk in a sort of unorthodox way around her guard, that will be totally fine. Okay. So often if I have a over-under pass, and the over-under pass would be me going to my left, and a standard leg weave would be also going to my left. And then if I'm responding to a loop choke, I actually want a leg weave that goes to my right. Okay, so that I can keep my head and my hips on opposite sides of the center line. So if I came in, here was what an initial over-under might look like. I'll show the threat of the loop choke, but let's assume threat of loop choke. I move my head to the other side. I gather up the legs like I normally would for a leg weave. We use two hands to form our grip on the bottom leg. We hunt for that bottom lapel. My head goes on one side, my hips go on the other, and we can easily walk around our partner's guard into the side control or something like this. Okay, can I come over? So again, just so we're on the same page here. Here's my my knee shield sort of half guard positioning, and would be looking to hold my leg, go underneath my hamstring, and place her shoulder right on my center line like this. Okay. If her shoulder can make it down, then it's possible for her to walk around my guard. You'll notice when she does that, her head has to go to the far side of the center line. If I'm a loop choke player, I'm going to take a hold of the lapel here, and if she tries to move her head across, I'm going to threaten to place her head into a loop choke. And loop chokes can come in a bunch of different forms. You can do a two-handed loop choke where one hand helps the other arm. You can do a sort of guillotine loop choke where maybe she moves her head in and I just button her head down for a moment, and now my right hand maybe grabs the leg or scoops it, and I'm essentially able to complete this like it were a guillotine. But regardless of which type of loop choke you use, all of them will have this same thread in common where it motivates her to not move her head across the center line. That's going to take the over-under pass off the table, and it makes it easier for me to play guard because I know her head's moving in this direction. So she's smart to that, and so she starts weaving instead of under, she starts weaving here into my bottom leg like this. Okay. Now my loop choke grip is actually not so useful to me. She takes her left hand up to my lapel, she starts crushing my knees together with her hip, and starts walking backwards to her right. And now, that is not so good. This probably looks like I'm in a bad position because I am in a bad position. And now she can start to fold me up and pass my guard, all those different things. Okay. So the big thing I'd pay attention to is the loop choke is going to motivate you to move your head to the side of their center line where you cannot over-under pass them. But any guard pass that works off of that new positioning is going to be totally fine. Leg weave was one that you mentioned, but there's a lot of other ones that are available. Just make sure that when you're passing someone's guard, your head is constantly going to one side of their center line and your hips are going to the other. Just think about side control. Your head's on one side, your hips on the other, and you're across their body. That's the classic manifestation of head on one side, hips on the other. All your guard passes are essentially trying to get to that point. So if you can't make that happen, that's when it's time to adjust. And then again, the last note on that, we just flip the perspectives around a little bit. Let's say I'm playing guard and I've never seen an over-under pass before. I know, what do you think? Why are you teaching us you've never seen an over-under pass? Here's the over-under grips, here's that shoulder coming down here, and I'm just like, what do I do about this? Well, I know her hip is on one side, and I get a sense that she's trying to essentially keep it on that side while she passes. Okay, I'm gonna use that to my advantage. Let's come back. So now I see the same grip arrangement. Emmy's already crushed me with this guard pass before. I know it's what's about to happen. So as she comes down to place her shoulder, I just keep her head on the same side of my center line. That meant me moving myself and me framing in some way, shape, or form. Now if Emmy tries to put her shoulder on me, it's not gonna happen, and I can start to follow up with other attacks here or other counter attacks. Okay, so you can use that information both as the guard passer, and then when you flip over and you're playing guard, you know that if you keep their head and hips on one side of your center line, they're never going to pass your guard, and you're going to be fine. So always just trying to have that ability to flip something you just learned around. You know, you learn something for offense, there's implications for defense, and just make sure you turn things around and look at it from that perspective, so that you get a full understanding of what's happening in any given moment. This is something that, you know, the more you can do this, the more you can sort of overcome somebody's defense or overcome somebody's offense, whether or not they perform it well or perform it perfectly. Because you sort of know what would be required to stop you, you can sort of preemptively address those sorts of things. Codename Cheese, does that get to the over-under that you were talking about?
Yeah, that helps a lot.
Okay. Did you have anything else on that, or is that?
I mean, not specifically on that. Now it's like I've got like questions on your perspective on like teaching and stuff, but I don't want to bore like, you know, your other students with that.
Oh, don't worry about them. I already took care of board. I bored them for us already.
Just to like, so right now, you know, USKO, I'm kind of helping to like rebuild that program. So I've got like some upper belts who, you know, like some of my training partners from headquarters who train there too can like help me out.
Yes.
But like, as a whole, when you're dealing with a whole bunch of new people, how do you divert your attention enough to make sure everybody gets it and everybody's doing the technique properly, but like you're still staying focused on the entirety of the class as a whole, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So this is something that I also ran into quite a bit when I was teaching at UCLA. Every quarter, you know, we were in this room that had like a capacity, let's say like 40 people, 60 people, something like that. And that was fine. Every quarter though, like when I was teaching there, we'd have like 80, 90 people show up for the first few classes. They were packed like sardines in there. And essentially I had to do a couple things. One, I had to make it very clear, very early, what people were getting into, so they could just know if it was for them or not. I wasn't trying to be brutal to anybody, but I didn't want people thinking they were doing, you know, ballet, and it turned out they were getting squished by some dude named Fred, and they just didn't want to do that anymore. And at the same time, you know, as you have more and more students, it's going to be tougher to give them all the individual attention that might be needed to make sure they're on the right track. So what I really started doing then and tried to do a lot now is to have one or two checks that everybody can understand that allow for them to verify whether or not they're doing a technique correctly or not. And you're going to have to start in a more simple fashion than you might assume, because you want it to be something that cannot possibly be done incorrectly. This is sort of where we started with these lessons. So this exists for really any position you need to teach, but I'll do it from here since this is what we were looking at. Let's say I've got a room full of beginners, and I say, all right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to play a little game with grips here. I'm going to take my seatbelt grip here. You can go over the details of which arm goes over the top and how to connect them and link them together. And all I want the other person to do, from Emmy's perspective, is to try and stand up without putting either one of her hands on the ground. And you'll see what I did there was, it wasn't something that's impossible for Emmy to do, but it's something that's very clear as to what she's trying to accomplish. She knows what standing up is, and it's not something that is bound up in a bunch of new concepts for the two of us. All I have to do is I get the seatbelt grip, she tries to stand up without putting her hands on the ground, and we just play this game for a little bit. If she's successful, great. I put no consequence to it. I haven't said you're right or wrong if you stand up, and I get to use a seatbelt grip. And then we come back and we say, okay, here's a seatbelt grip. Now, the person who was standing up is going to try to put their spine on the floor. Okay, and we give that a shot, right? And then we might come back and go, okay, if you were Emmy, did one of those two seem like it was more productive for something we might call defending? And defending meaning that I can exit from the situation on my terms and I'm no longer under the other person's control. And after a little bit of maybe deliberation, you'll probably find that most people see if Em can stand up, it's a little easier for her to get away than if she just lies down on the floor. And you can use that as an initial sort of to paint the initial landscape of what are our primary objectives. Well, if she's escaping, she wants to be able to stand up and walk away from me. And if I can keep her from doing that, maybe by putting her spine on the floor, then I'm being productive. Okay? Now that's just understanding the general concept of escaping and the general concept of control. You can go a little further and go, all right, so that's great. We've got this idea of standing. We've got this idea of her putting her spine on the ground. What about our grip? I've got my seatbelt grip. Now, if Emmy just uses one hand at a time, either one, can she break my grip and then stand up? And you might play around with that a little bit. What you'll notice is sometimes the grip does get broken, and obviously the person's able to just run away and stand up and it's no problem. And now you're starting to illustrate, well, my grip is what's allowing for me to control the other person and stop them from defending. Come back in. Then we get more specific. What if, can I use my seatbelt grip? And now that we would have everybody take one hand around the shoulder and cover up their thumb. Okay, now our partner can use one hand or two hands and try to free themselves from this grip. And they'll struggle. A lot of times this is where you're going to have to dive into some detail and where really people will get their first glimpse as to the power of changing something by 1 or 2 centimeters. Because if we all know here, from the people that I see that are in the room right now, that if I have my head close to my hand, but my thumb is not hidden, I might as well be like this and at a long distance, because the grip is going to break just as easily. But by moving things a couple centimeters to where I'm actually covering up my own thumb, it's almost impossible for that grip to break. And that's the kind of thing that's tough to do as the room scales up in size, is to get those finer details communicated to all the students, because it's usually what you would do is just go to every single person and do the technique on them. They do it on you, and you can get it, they'll get a feeling for what's possible and what's not. But in this scenario, we've had to sort of gradually build a little staircase that allowed for us to arrive at this critical juncture where we see the importance of hiding the thumb and ways of doing that. And once you have people's attention in that way, and they're tuned into this idea that centimeters make a big difference, then the instructions become a lot more, they're much more receptive to them. Because you've all been in that scenario where somebody's going into an amazing amount of detail about a position that's totally new to you. And even if you're a brown belt or a black belt, if the big picture of the position is new, those details have nothing to stick to. And basically everyone is a black belt in standing and walking around, so you can stick new ideas to standing up and walking around. But in order to go beyond that, you sort of have to establish the landscape every single time. And so we use standing up and walking around to create an initial check. Can you get up and walk away from me? Can you break my grip? And then we can zoom in and say, well, with one arm, is it possible for me to stop your 2 arms? And then people are more in tune to this notion of, okay, that stuff was familiar. Here's some new stuff that's kind of interesting. And what is he getting at with all of this? And then just to sort of close off this loop, what you would want to get to is a point where you're having people go from initial grip, they're preventing the other person from standing, they're able to put them down to the floor, things like this. They're confident in their ability to cover up a grip and maintain a position with one hand. And then you show them the full rear naked grip, and you say, okay, well, now the other person can use 2 hands and try to break free from the grip. And oftentimes it's useful to have groups of 3 and have a third person come over. Just imagine a third person walking over and try to break the grip as well. Because now you're starting to demonstrate something even more important, which is not only can I create a position that my partner cannot overcome, it's actually so robust and powerful that a third person coming in is not enough to overcome the mechanical strength of the position. And that's important, especially when, let's say it was Emmy and I's first day, I might not be all that impressed by my ability to do this and her inability to break it. But it's going to really be powerful to someone who's the smaller training partner if she can put a stranglehold on me, keep it in place, and even a third person coming in is not able to unwrap that. Now she's actually seeing the potential for herself in martial arts. And that is something that's really important, because big, strong, athletic people, they're going to get it fairly easily. But that's not really the crowd that you in your heart of hearts really want to absorb this knowledge. You want people to absorb it who actually need a vector that allows for them to overcome someone who's much stronger than them. And so you can impress upon someone very early the idea that if you do this movement right, you can actually overcome somebody who's twice as large as you. And I'm going to demonstrate that for you. You don't even have to trust me. We can verify this. Put the strangle on, crawl it all into place, have a third person come in, and have them try to break the grip. Guarantee you, you can strangle the person until they tap before that grip ever comes apart. And again, once you do that sort of thing, then a large room becomes a lot easier to manage, because they trust that what you're showing them has actual importance and relevance, and you can keep putting these checks into place and saying, look, I want you to verify using this one detail. Can they turn or can they not? Can they sit up or can they not? Can they hold up their body weight or can they not? And over time, those will really allow for you to get the whole room onto the same page and then move forward. Does that help out at all, Michael? Or
yeah.
Sorry, codename Cheese?
Yeah, it's good.
And yeah, I'm always happy to go over that sort of thing, because I think you know, when you teach jiu-jitsu, you will end up improving yourself, and a big part of it is when you're teaching somebody is to be able to answer the question that maybe they want to ask you, but they don't know how to ask you yet because they're new. You know, they want to ask you, or they sort of ask you what do you do if somebody counters you? And you know, like, well, if somebody really counters you, you just lose. Like, a true counter is really going to flip the... But what they're maybe asking you is, what if you're doing this and somebody resists you with absolutely everything they have? What should I do then? And that's one question. What if I'm doing this movement and they know that I'm going to do it? Should I still make the attempt? That's another question. But those can be sort of blurred when somebody poses the question as, what if they counter me? And sometimes it's useful to be able to separate out the question for the person and answer them in turn. So just something else to keep in mind.